Okay, here we go. Hey folks, this is John Polomny, Actionable Intelligence. Today we have another guest in our long series of experts on interesting subjects. We welcome Scott Osheroff, the Chief Investment Officer of the AFC Uzbekistan Fund. I know some people have been anticipating this information specifically as it relates to the recent Uzbekistan National Investment Fund that just went public. So we're going to talk a little bit about Uzbekistan and that, and uh, what Scott's been doing in Uzbekistan, I think, for several years. So, Scott, welcome to the interview series, and feel free to give yourself a short introduction. I think we've talked before, but it's been a big gap since the last time we talked to you. So if you can refresh your short bio, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, John. Um, I'm originally from the States, went to university in Boston, and in 2012, basically booked a one-way plane ticket to Mongolia, spent a few weeks in Southeast Asia, but ended up in Mongolia working with a group doing private equity in frontier markets. Then I went down to spend time in Cambodia, Vietnam, started working for Asia Frontier Capital, I believe in 2013. And then while I was bouncing around Southeast Asia, focused on some of those markets, I ended up going to Myanmar and restructured the biggest ruby miner in the world, so a family conglomerate there. So I ended up moving to Yangon and was there for about 2 years. And then in 2018, I went to Kazakhstan for an investor tour, tacked on Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan. And there was a change of government as a result of the former president having passed away in 2016 in Uzbekistan. And everyone expected the former prime minister, who became president, to maintain the status quo. The country did a complete 180, opened up, went from a centrally planned to a largely free market economy. And we started investing there through our main Asia Frontier Fund. Then in 2019, we were the first people to convert and repatriate capital from Uzbekistan's capital markets back abroad because previously there were capital controls. And then we launched the AFC Uzbekistan Fund. I was still going back and forth between mainly Myanmar, Singapore, a bit of Cambodia, and Uzbekistan. And visas were difficult at the time to get. So in January 2020, I got a job as an adjunct professor teaching 7 hours at a local university for an MBA program and expected to be there for 3 months. COVID hit and it basically became home. And the rest is sort of history. And the whole region has completely blossomed, as you know, over the past 5, 6 years, all the way from Central Asia into Georgia and the broader Caucasus.
All right, thanks for that. One of the things that you and I have talked about in the past, and you've talked about, is well, maybe everybody isn't familiar with the historical Silk Road, and that Central Asia, in many times in history, has played a significant bridge in trade between East and West. And you have a thesis. I don't know if it's a thesis, but an idea we've talked about before. This Fertile Crescent um, uh, type situation. You just briefly mentioned it, from Georgia all the way through Turkey and into the stands. And broadly, if you can just touch on that real quick, like what do you see broadly for that whole region? Because it's virtually ignored. Nobody talked about it. I mean, I can go to anybody into the U.S. with a map and say, okay, show them Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan. It just is one big thing in their mind. I mean, I think one author described it, Richard Mayberry, I don't know if he's still right, called it Chaostan, but it's not really that. It's a tremendous opportunity. Maybe you could speak just broadly on that, maybe specific to Uzbekistan a little bit.
Sure. I mean, the broader region conveniently looks like a crescent going from the Middle East up into over to China via Central Asia, cover India, Russia. And this part of the region has the majority of the world's population, significant amount of natural resources, large amount of gold, low debt, good demographics, most of the world's manufacturing capacity. This part of the world can do business with itself for the next 50, 100 years and be perfectly fine. And that's what you're seeing is you're seeing integration, largely through China's Belt and Road Initiative. But being more specific then on Central Asia. If you think Central Asia, it's five stands created by the Soviet Union. They carved them up just the way the European um, colonizers did in Africa. They carved up Central Asia to make sure it wouldn't function. Look at a map of Uzbekistan, and the western border is a straight line, simply so they wouldn't have access to the Caspian for oil and transport. And the water resources come from Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan. Uzbekistan is sort of the heartland with the majority of the country's population. And then in terms of hydrocarbon resources, that's largely Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan. So you put all this country, if you put all these countries together, historically, before the Russians came in, it was called Turkestan, and Turkestan was one region, if you will. And you put all these countries together, it makes very good economic sense as a functional country. But again, with the intention to make sure the region wouldn't ever function, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a period of time where, to a degree, it didn't. Ever since President Mirziyoyev came to power in Uzbekistan, he's resolved border disputes. There have been issues with water that have been resolved. So now the region is largely homogeneous in terms of how it functions as a broader organism. And Uzbekistan is at the center of that, largely because of it having the biggest population in the region. Kazakhstan is about 18 million, if I'm not mistaken, and Uzbekistan is 38, probably approaching 39 later this year.
Yes, the positive demographics is one thing that I'm intrigued by. One of the other things I think people don't understand, people can just do this as a general exercise, is kind of go on YouTube. You could just like put in stuff like the amount of tourism. I mean, they have a bullet train in Uzbekistan. You can go and look at the Tashkent metro that the Soviets built. It rivals what you would see in St. Petersburg or Moscow or any of these former Soviet republics. And, the Uzbekistan did get a lot of capital and infrastructure, not just physical, but also intellectual. I mean, the people there are, I would assume, it appears to me at least, fairly highly educated. Um, a lot of people, yes, we have the ex-Soviet apparatchiks that are still hanging around in some of the businesses, but a lot of people that I've run into or seen um, have been educated in the West, understand finance properly. One of the things I think that's important, I mean, that's just what I see. I've never been to Uzbekistan, but just from my research and other people that I've talked to. So it's not Afghanistan, if you will. It's although it shares a small border with them, and they are increasing trade, but that's another sidebar. But it's not a backwards country. I mean, it was, but then this president has done a lot. This government has done a lot. Now, again, it's not a Jeffersonian democracy. Um, so, if you get tied up in that, you can go down those rabbit holes. Don't intend to do that here. I'm more concerned with what I see as, you have a country that seems to be compounding economic growth at 6 to 7%. I think I'm correct in saying this. It was one of the only countries that grew during COVID. I think it had positive economic growth. And so what do you see? I mean, obviously Tashkent, but tourism, it's now this country's now hitting the all of the top tourism websites. I'm seeing more articles written about this. Kind of get into, you go to that now to where, 8 or 10 years ago, they were still mobilizing the population to go out and hand pick cotton. I mean, those days are kind of over with, I hope. I think they are. As things, but that's where you've went from almost a North Korean type mentality to an open market. I mean, can you give me a few vignettes or what you've seen? I mean, because we've known each other for a while. I was a full disclosure, an investor in the Uzbekistan Fund. It's kind of been, I think we were a little early, but what are we seeing now? It looks like we're on the launch pad and we're preparing for liftoff. I mean, I don't want to be too hyperbolic here, but we had like this long period where, you know, things were the economy, all these reforms were happening, but it wasn't translating into a lot of moves in the market, the stock market. Where are we at? Can you give us a few vignettes and kind of a timeline and what has changed that kind of um, um, maybe is going to be a sea change for the markets there?
I'll give you a great example, which is not related to the stock market. in 21, I believe, when Biden pulled out of the U.S. out of Afghanistan, I was planning to go to northern Afghanistan because the bridge in what is it, Mazar-e Sharif? Oh, sorry, it's Termez, um, the Friendship Bridge, which connects the two. I was planning to go across for a bit of tourism, and unfortunately, I didn't go because Biden announced a few months prior that they were going to pull out, and I wanted to keep my head attached to my neck. But um, I went down to Termez and saw a city that was built during the time of Alexander the Great. Afghanistan's right across the Amu River, and there was effectively nothing there. There was one hotel in the entire town. Now there's a special economic zone on the edge of town near the Friendship Bridge. There are construction materials companies, um, distributors, traders, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a Hilton hotel right across the river from Afghanistan, and it's for Afghans to come over, go into the free economic zone, buy, trade, go back. So you have a Hilton right on the border with Afghanistan, things that didn't exist 5 years ago. The country has had that type of transformation from a dirt lot to a special economic zone with the Hilton. Um, so yeah, the country has done very well with its economic growth. The problem is that it hasn't translated to a large degree in um, in the stock market. We started investing in 2018. We've done not poorly. I mean, performance has especially picked up over the past year with the market bottom. Um, the challenge has been infrastructure, which for a foreigner to open a brokerage account has historically been difficult. Equally, the problem is that international custodians and whatnot, so the broad infrastructure. But then the challenge is that you look at foreign investment funds, and I've met many that have come to the market and say, I see the opportunity. And this is the problem with broader Central Asia, even Georgia, Kazakhstan. There aren't that many things to buy in the capital markets, whether it's equities or corporate bonds. And they come into the market and say, I see the opportunity. Our minimum ticket's 5 million. What can we buy? In one purchase, nothing. Um, that just changed with the Uzbekistan National Investment Fund, UZNIF, which, as you mentioned, started trading the other day in London, and on Monday will start trading in Uzbekistan as well. So they raised $600 million between London and Tashkent. This is what is finally getting the country's capital markets on the radar of global investors, and there should be a slew of other IPOs, later this year. Uzbekistan Airways, hopefully, and then a handful of others over the next few years. But I would caution patience simply because I'd rather them prepare these companies correctly and then list them rather than have screw ups, because there have historically been 2 or 3 privatization programs where they announced big ambitions and they just disappeared into the ether because these companies weren't ready. So now you have UZNIF and then presumably a few others. But then one other aspect of this is that when I went to the market or to the country in 2018, inflation was roughly 15%. I believe the currency devalued that year by 19%. As of April, inflation is 7%, and the policy rate has only changed, I think, 150 basis points. So inflation is now 7%. The currency last year appreciated roughly 7.5%, and this year it's respectively flat. So my thesis has always been that is you got the currency under control along with inflation, and as inflation came down, you'd see bank term deposit rates where most people like to save if they want to save in the formal system. And bank term deposit rates a few years ago were PBC, which you know well, offered term deposits at 26% per annum, but compounded monthly. So ridiculous rates. Why would you invest in the stock market? Those are now in the 18 to 19% range. Corporate bond market, which didn't exist a few years ago, then you go back a year and a half, and there were companies offering bonds at 29, 30%, are now in the low 20s to high teens. So all of these, you're seeing broad yield compression, if you will, in these instruments, and that is leading to a transition to locals and, of course, foreigners saying, maybe I'll increase my allocation to the stock market. And that's where, since really March of last year, we're at this tipping point where money's moving into the market. And now the challenge is one of, because there's always another challenge in a frontier market, the challenge now is liquidity and product. we need more liquidity to incentivize more investors to come to the market, and people need to be able to make money, which Uznif they should be able to, among others. But then the problem is that once people make money in one or two instruments, whether it's a corporate bond or some of the equities, we need more listings. So now we're at that tipping point of liquidity, 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 and more product.
So it could be like a catch 22, but it could also develop into like a flywheel effect. As you get more capital, then that would be, certain circumstances where that would encourage more listings, and then it just keeps, because like you said, I think there's a lot of interest there and people get the story. I remember when I initially invested in the fund, the Uzbekistan fund. I mean, what attracted me was the valuations were so, I mean, they were generationally low. This was like a once in a lifetime opportunity, in my view. It's still cheap. It's not that cheap anymore, but talk about like the valuations and some like, I mean, I was shocked. Like there was like things, I don't even remember some of the companies, like the commodity exchange was like, I think on a PE of 3 and had some kind of crazy dividend. I don't even remember. There was like crazy opportunities like that. Those don't exist anymore, but they're not crazy, but it's still relatively cheap.
So when we started investing, there were companies, a slew of companies, including the commodities exchange, were growing 500-600% per annum, bottom line. Some of them had dividend yields in the 50% range. The commodities exchange, certainly revenue and profitability growth have slowed, but still growing above GDP. And the dividend yield on that one is high single digits. But you look at one of the biggest private banks in the country with no state ownership, uh, first quarter earnings were good, double digits. But the kicker was that book value grew 29% year over year. It's trading at 1 times book or just south of, and it's trading at a PE of roughly 2 times. So, and this is one that probably in due course will do a list in London. They want to. They're working on a corporate transformation, but it'll take a few years to be completed. But you've got a company that's growing its book at 30% per annum that's trading for book. You still have a handful of opportunities like that. And that's one of the more liquid names where if you wanted to put a few $100,000 to work, you could. So yeah, it's not as cheap as it was, but it's still very cheap. And the or the valuation unlock is going to come from the ability for more liquidity to come into the market.
Outstanding. Let me ask you this. Okay, we've talked about all the unicorns and lollipops and ice cream cones. What are some of the challenges that you've seen? You're there. What are some things that, well, I don't want you to take a shot at it at the government or anything, but what if Scott Osheroff was king for a day, uh, what are some things that he sees that need to be changed, or would things that are offsides that need to get on side to I know they have water they could have some water issues. I'm always nervous about the energy. The economy is growing very quickly. I did note that I did see a announcement by BP that they have entered with the state company, I think, for some exploration and some natural gas. Can you speak to some of the challenges in Uzbekistan? Because it's not just a one-way street. Like you said, it's a frontier market. It's not even a front. It's a frontier pre-frontier market. So yeah,
The biggest challenges would probably be, I mean, broadly logistics because it's one of the two double landlocked countries in the world outside of, I believe, the other's Liechtenstein. Um, so outside of geography, water is, of course, an issue. You've got a growing population and you have a large agricultural base, but water is also very cheap. You look at what they've done with electricity. Electricity, I had a call with a crypto mining company the other day that was interested in Uzbekistan. And I said, don't waste your time. A few years ago, there was a flat tariff, and it was roughly 3.1, 3.2 US cents per kilowatt hour for electricity. Now there's a tiered tariff for residential, but industrial is roughly 9 cents per kilowatt hour. Still below the general cost of production, but much higher. Not great if you're in the crypto business. So energy demand is growing very fast, and they're one of the biggest uranium producers in the world, and it has killed me because President Vladimir Putin visited in 2018, signed about $30 billion in deals. One of them was for, I think, about 12 or 13 billion for a nuclear power plant. Still hasn't happened. They're talking about it. They're trying to advance it, and now they're talking with the French as well for SMRs. Um, Kazakhstan finally got the message. This part of the world produces 55-60% of the world's uranium. Kazakhstan has a bit of processing capacity beyond yellowcake, and there's no reason that this part of the world, specifically Uzbekistan, should not be mining uranium, sending it to Russia or China for enrichment, put into fuel rods, and then signing deals with the Koreans, with the Chinese, with the Russians, and building a handful of nuclear power plants and being the battery of the broader region. Because, for example, Uzbekistan supplies electricity to Afghanistan. I mean, this is an absolute no-brainer. They could be the battery to the region, as Laos was always branded the battery of Southeast Asia.
Hmm.
So, from an energy standpoint, what worries me is that they're very focused on renewables. They want by 2030 to have 40% of electricity generation from renewables, which, if you look at Germany, I mean, it's a much sunnier country, but if you look at Germany, once you get over 12 to 15% of your energy grid being renewables, it becomes exponentially more unstable. So there's that. And then I guess you could say manufacturing policy. As you imagine, it's a very difficult place to do business, which is why having lived there for so long and looked at all the opportunities, it's there's many businesses that could be created, but the easiest thing to do is just to be involved in the capital markets. You can sell 5 days a week, and we've talked about this a handful of times. I mean, broadly, even globally, it's just so much easier to be, if you've got the capital, to be invested in the capital markets rather than trying to start a restaurant or a factory. I mean, I have a friend, not to go on too long of a tangent, but I have a friend who has a few factories in the west of the country, and textile factories. And in September and October, his staff walk out of the factory. And the reason is because there's no more forced labor in the cotton industry, but his staff can make more money going and picking cotton and getting paid X amount, a few thousand soon per kilo, than getting paid 150 odd $200 per month working in his factory. And then you think about the logistical issues and high energy costs. So they have growing pains. That's really what it comes down to. And then again, same for water. If they jacked up water prices, it would be an impediment to the country's agricultural production. But you think about greenhouses. There are a lot of greenhouses there. An Uzbek greenhouse is very simply take a piece of land, put a box over it, a greenhouse, and keep watering per normal. So, and then heat it during the winter with tires, garbage, coal, whatever. They're not advanced greenhouses. You could save so much water and solve that issue in a few years with better water management. So there's nothing that can't be solved.
Uh, Last thing I want to talk about, because we have a amount of time. Well, a couple things. You mentioned just briefly um, mining in Uzbekistan. I mean, it's a tremendous gold miner, state company, uranium. I think I actually saw recently that it's kind of making some people a little bit nervous when they came out and said how much uranium they had produced in the last year. And like you said, there's no, do they get that value add is there, or are they just going to like, produce it and dump it on the market? And I don't know how they're marketing it, but I think they're selling it in the spot market, whatever they're doing. I don't even know if they have long-term contracts. But the place is definitely underexplored. And what do you see as far as the mining industry? It seems like the state copper mine and your gold mines seem to be fairly well managed, but is there an opportunity there? And do you think that the government there is more inclined to just maybe open it up to some foreign partners at least, or are they just going to say, hey, we know what we're doing here, we're making enough money, there's no reason to cut anybody else in on our good thing? What's your view on that?
Well, in the 90s, when you had all these former Soviet republics through the voucher system giving shares and companies away to the population, and that created the oligarchs, Uzbekistan actually had the best distribution of wealth. Not perfect, but better than anyone else of the republics. Um, the challenge is that every banker, especially the big banks, wants Navoe Gold and Almali, the copper mine, to IPO. Navoi, for example, if it was to IPO, would be between the size of Barrick Gold or Barrick Mining and Anglo Gold Ashanti. They produced more than Anglo Gold Ashanti last year. Um, and it's probably 30 odd percent of GDP. The problem is that they don't need to IPO it. That's the challenge. As every investor, I would love to have a stake in it. Um, what's the incentive for the government? Sell 5%, become more transparent, clean up the business, get a few $1 billion. They don't need it. If they need money, they'll dig it up out of the ground. Um, Foreign management, they're managing fine. They've got SRK in there, helping expand the resource and doing a huge amount of exploration for both mines. They don't need another cook in the kitchen. So my hunch is that everyone wants Navoi to IPO. I don't see any reason for it to IPO, so I wouldn't be surprised if it never IPOs. And therefore, it'll probably be very difficult to get exposure to mining in the country.
Okay. And that kind of segues into the last thing I wanted to talk to you with you about the recent listing of the I guess we're calling it Uzneft, I don't know,
Uznef.
Uzbekistan National Investment Fund, which is listed in London now, and I think it's going to be listed in Tashkent also. Can you speak a little bit about that, what the purpose of that was for the government, and what people what's the deal with this offering?
Sure. So there's no better way to clean up state-owned enterprises than to force them to go public. Um, and what the government's done is they've taken part of their share in 13 state-owned enterprises, logistics, so that the railway monopoly, Uzbekistan Airways, um, gas and electricity distribution, and some financial services companies. So broad infrastructure, effectively the Uzbek economy minus mining. They package them into a vehicle, and this vehicle is being managed by Franklin Templeton Asset Management, and as you mentioned, is already trading in London. It'll start trading in Tashkent on Monday. And the focus of Templeton is to tighten the screws, clean up these businesses. They've already put independent members on the boards of the portfolio companies. They can get involved in the selection of upper level management, CEO, CFO, and the goal is to make these properly run. A handful of them are already profitable, but to make them properly run companies at the international level.
Indeed, and I was looking at their website. They have anywhere from 25 to 40%. You know, the government's given that much of the stake into this fund, so you can go through each entity that's on there. Like you said, it's mostly a lot of infrastructure. I did see like water companies, a hydroelectric company, all these different companies. And so one of the things I think that I heard it was either this offering, I mean, that shows you the excitement for these. These were state-owned companies, but I think it was 3 or 4 times oversubscribed, I believe, if I saw the press release correctly, read it. And also, I think a lot of people have asked me, they said, well, I would suspect that as this goes along, it'll be like another, I don't want to get too far into this, but another vehicle that Franklin Templeton did with another country, a property fund. Eventually, they'll value this and then there'll be a net asset value, and then you'll be able to see if there's a discount or these things typically trade at a discount. I don't know what the initial valuations were. I haven't dived deep into the prospectus or anything, but um, I'm not saying people should just rush out and buy it, but it's an opportunity that if you had I looked at something similar, this other property fund, and I did an analysis on it. It ran from 2015. It had GDRs in London to 2025, and it basically compounded at 14% a year, which isn't bad. And that was in a European or Eastern European economy that had negative demographics. It was way worse off. So this, I think, is a little bit different. I'm not saying you're going to have, 30, 40, 50% a year on this, but I think that this has some opportunity if somebody looks at it, but it's not something I think you have to rush out and buy on Monday. Any thoughts on on the valuation or the initial view on it?
So right now it's trading in London at roughly 27 per share. I forget what the calculated NAV is, but the government brought forward some tariff regulations for electricity and gas distribution. From it was supposed to be reformed in 2028. It's now going to be reformed this quarter. So the May NAV, I estimate at roughly 35, 36 per share. It's trading at 27 now. So yeah, I mean, it should be a slow, steady grind as um, they clean up these businesses further and make them more profitable. And then, as you mentioned, with these closed-end vehicles typically traded at discount to NAV. What I imagine Franklin Templeton doing is at some point, as they start to get dividends from their portfolio companies, part of that will certainly be dividended out to investors. Part of it will very likely, I'd imagine, be put into a normal course issue or bid, both in London and in Tashkent, to make sure that the discount to NAV stays at a respectable discount, single digit percent, I'd presume. They don't want it blowing out to 40, 50% discount because that disincentivizes someone to buy it. So, and of course, that's good for the investor. So I'd imagine a mix of those two over time.
Outstanding. All right. Well, that's pretty much what I wanted to cover in our short amount of time. We're kind of running up on time. Um, if you would, can you get, if people are interested in following you, I know you have a Telegram channel also, which is interesting. You talk about a lot of other things besides uh, Uzbekistan, mostly other things that are interesting. And just give us how people can follow you if they're interested in knowing what you're doing.
Sure. Our website is asiafrontiercapital.com, and the Telegram, I guess perhaps I'll give to you and maybe you can put it down below. But if people search the Telegram channel, it should be Your to Capital.
Yes, and I will attach those into the show notes for this, so people can visit that and check it out further. So appreciate you coming on. Any closing thoughts or comments before we close out?
No, I think we covered most of what's going on in the region. So thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Outstanding. All right, appreciate it, and thank you. That concludes the interview. And stay tuned, folks, for further interesting interviews with provocative and unusual thinkers. Thanks, and we'll talk to you soon.